Welcome, chosen ones. The moment you become still in situations designed to provoke you is the exact moment their curiosity turns into quiet observation. Because silence, when it's intentional, unsettles people. They begin to watch more closely, not out of admiration, but out of confusion. Your lack of reaction removes the script they were relying on, and now they're left trying to decode you. Conversations get replayed in their minds, your pauses get analyzed, your restraint gets questioned. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you've done something rare. You didn't respond the way they expected, and now they're searching for answers in a pattern that no longer exists. This isn't simple curiosity. It's a quiet disruption in the way they thought things were supposed to unfold. In their minds, you had a role, a pattern, a predictable path, and you stepped outside of it without explanation. That's what unsettles them. Because people are comfortable with what they can anticipate. And when someone moves with calm certainty instead of noise or validation, it breaks that comfort. You didn't seek attention, yet attention found you. You didn't create chaos, yet your consistency created questions. And now, without realizing it, they're studying you. Not because you demanded it, but because your steady, unbothered progress doesn't fit into anything they can easily define. That's exactly why unpredictability draws scrutiny. Not because it's loud, but because it disrupts the patterns people rely on to feel in control. When someone can't be easily categorized, attention sharpens. And in your case, it wasn't chaos that set you apart. It was composure. Pressure came and you stayed steady. Situations turned unfair and you didn't collapse into explanation or seek approval to smooth it over. You moved without theatrics, without the need to justify every step. And that's what made people pause. Because when someone refuses to react the expected way, it forces others to confront the fact that their usual ways of reading, predicting, and influencing no longer apply, and that's where the fixation takes root. Quietly, almost invisibly. Because what unsettles people isn't struggle. It's the absence of visible struggle where they expected it most. You carried weight without broadcasting it, moved forward without narrating every hardship, and that silence disrupted their sense of logic. The equation they had for you no longer balances, and when that happens, people start auditing every detail. They shift from casual observers to silent analysts, tracking patterns, recalling moments, connecting dots you never meant to leave behind. Not out of support, but out of a need to resolve the contradiction you've become, someone who endured, adapted, and advanced without ever putting it on display. The kind who clock your rhythm without saying a word, your pauses, your entrances, the moments you choose not to engage. They keep it light in your presence, but the real conversation starts after you're gone, where your behavior gets replayed and dissected in detail. What they don't realize is how transparent it all becomes. Subtlety fades when attention turns into fixation. On the surface, everything seems casual, almost indifferent, but underneath there's a constant scramble to interpret you. And the irony is, there's no grand performance to decode, no dramatic shift to explain. You're simply moving through life without the noise they expected, and that quiet consistency is what keeps them watching, trying to make sense of something that was never meant to be analyzed. No collapse they can point to, no messy narrative they can package into something that makes them feel ahead of you. Just steady movement, quiet focus, and a presence that keeps showing up without explanation. Meanwhile, in the background, you've become a recurring thought in minds that are trying a little too hard to figure you out. And that's where the shift happens. Because once you recognize what's really going on, their attention stops feeling heavy. It stops feeling like scrutiny you need to answer to. You begin to see it clearly, as a reaction, not a reflection. A response triggered by something in you that doesn't bend, doesn't over-explain, and doesn't fit into anything they can comfortably define. Before we step into the first point, take a moment to truly lock in your presence here. go ahead and hit that subscribe button, turn the notification bell on, and leave a like to align yourself with this message. If something here resonates with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs this clarity right now. You didn't come across this by accident. There's a reason you're hearing this at this exact moment. So step into it and own it. Drop 444 in the comments so I can recognize everyone who's truly tapped in. Now, let's move into the first point. Number 1, their attention was never about admiration. It was about explanation. In the beginning, you weren't even on their radar. You blended into the background of their assumptions, filed away as someone who would eventually bend like everyone else. Pressure was supposed to reshape you, to quiet you, to make you easier to predict and easier to place. That was the expectation. But when that didn't happen, when you kept moving, steady and unchanged in ways they couldn't account for, it forced a shift in perspective. Now they're not watching out of curiosity alone. They're trying to understand how you didn't follow the outcome they had already decided for you. When that expectation collapsed, it left behind a kind of quiet discomfort they couldn't ignore. Because what stands out isn't what you achieved. It's what you carried and still refused to become. Situations that normally distort people, harden them, or leave visible scars didn't redirect you in the way they anticipated. You didn't mirror the damage, didn't adopt the patterns that created it. And that's where their confusion deepens. It's not your progress that puzzles them. It's your ability to endure without losing your center, to move forward without letting the weight rewrite who you are. Quiet resilience doesn't register in a world that equates strength with spectacle. When there's no visible fallout, no dramatic proof of what you endured, it disrupts the way people measure things. So their attention sharpens. They listen more carefully, notice what you reveal, and what you deliberately keep to yourself. Moments get replayed, conversations get dissected, not out of admiration, but out of a need to solve something that doesn't add up. Because what they're really searching for isn't your story. It's the mechanism behind it. The unseen discipline, the internal structure, the part of you that stayed intact when everything else was meant to come undone. There's a reflection in your presence that most people don't want to acknowledge. Your ability to keep going quietly brings attention to the moments they paused, settled, or chose the easier path. And instead of confronting that directly, they shift their focus onto you. Studying you becomes a safer alternative to examining themselves. If they can label your resilience as luck, timing, or some hidden advantage, it gives them an explanation that protects their comfort. Because admitting that the difference might have come down to choices, discipline, or perspective, that's a conversation many people aren't ready to have with themselves. Anything but the realization that resilience isn't something handed out, it's something built, decision by decision, in moments no one else sees. And that's why their focus feels so intense. It doesn't come from admiration, and it's not driven by competition. It's something deeper, an unsettled curiosity that refuses to go away. Because your presence challenges a belief they relied on, that pressure justifies collapse. But you stand there as proof that it doesn't. That enduring without breaking is possible. And for someone who once leaned on hardship as a reason to stop, that truth doesn't inspire them. It confronts them. So their attention becomes almost analytical, like they're examining a result that contradicts everything they believed was inevitable. It's not admiration guiding them, and it's not imitation they're after. It's resolution. They're trying to close a gap that your existence keeps reopening, because as long as they can't explain how you made it through without breaking, it unsettles the narrative they've built to justify their own outcomes. You become a question they can't ignore, a living contradiction that keeps reminding them that a different ending was always possible, even if they chose not to reach for it. Number 2, fixation begins the moment their storyline about you stops making sense. They had you mapped out, your limits, your reactions, the exact point where you were supposed to hesitate or fall short. It was a narrative that kept everything comfortable, because if you were predictable, you were controllable. But when you moved outside of that script, when you didn't stumble on cue or shrink into the role they assigned you, the structure they built started to collapse. And once that happens, they don't just let it go, they double down, watching more closely, trying to rebuild a version of you that fits again, even as you continue to prove that you were never meant to be contained in the first place. That narrative gave them a sense of control. It let them compare themselves to a version of you that was already limited in their minds, already destined to fall short. But you didn't follow that script, not loudly, not all at once, but in quiet, undeniable ways. You moved at your own pace, responded on your own terms, and kept progressing without waiting for approval or recognition. There was no performance, no attempt to prove anything. And that's what unsettled everything. Because when you stop playing a role others assign to you, you don't just break expectations. You expose how much of their confidence depended on you staying exactly where they placed you. Everything they relied on to understand you started to fall apart. That's when attention shifts into something deeper. Because when people can't make sense of something, they don't ignore it, they try to fix it. And you became something that didn't need fixing, just understanding. A contradiction they couldn't neatly resolve. So the observation intensifies. Small moments become significant, ordinary choices become clues, and your consistency becomes something they try to decode piece by piece. It's no longer passive curiosity. It's an active need to restore a sense of order that your presence quietly disrupted. They're not just observing. You've become a question their mind keeps returning to. Because when what they see no longer aligns with what they believed, it creates a tension they can't easily ignore. Your steadiness, your restraint, your quiet progress, it all stands outside the version of reality they were certain of. So they revisit moments, reanalyze decisions, and search for patterns that will bring everything back into alignment. Not out of interest alone, but out of a need to resolve the unease. Because when someone can't predict you anymore, it doesn't just challenge their perception of you, it unsettles their confidence in how they understand everything else. Your presence disrupts more than their opinion of you. It unsettles the rules they thought governed everything. The connection they relied on between struggle and collapse, effort and limitation no longer holds up when placed next to your reality. And that's why your actions feel amplified under their gaze. Not because you're doing anything extraordinary on the surface, but because nothing you do aligns with the framework they trusted. So they keep adjusting their perspective, trying to reshape the narrative in a way that protects their sense of understanding. Because accepting you as you are would mean admitting that their version of how things work was never as certain as they believed. And the calmer you stay, the more their attention tightens around you. Because what unsettles them isn't movement. It's your lack of reaction to things that were meant to provoke one. The script they relied on didn't just fail. It disappeared the moment you stopped playing along. Now every quiet decision you make feels louder than any performance ever could. But at this point, it's no longer about understanding you. It's about them trying to regain a sense of control over a perspective that no longer holds. Your stillness exposes the gap, and the more you remain grounded, the harder it becomes for them to ignore how much of their narrative depended on you staying predictable. Number 3, your reality quietly dismantles the stories they've relied on to stay comfortable. Because when someone continues forward under similar or even harsher conditions, it becomes harder to blame everything on timing, luck, or circumstance. You didn't announce anything, you didn't challenge them directly, but your progress speaks in a way explanations can't compete with. And that's where the tension builds, because now the reasons they once leaned on start to feel less like truth and more like protection. Your movement forces a comparison they didn't ask for, and it exposes something they'd rather not confront, that the limits they accepted may not have been as fixed as they believed. And then there's you, moving with quiet certainty, building, adapting, advancing without needing to justify a single step. No explanations, no permission, no performance to make it easier for others to accept. And that's what makes your presence so confronting. Because every move you make doesn't just represent progress, it reflects possibility. The kind they once dismissed, the kind they convinced themselves wasn't available to them. So they watch, not because they're inspired, but because your path quietly unravels the comfort of their own conclusions, showing them that a different outcome was never out of reach. It was just never pursued. Every quiet win, every measured response, every line you refuse to let be crossed becomes something they can't easily look away from. Not because it's loud, but because it reflects what they've chosen to ignore within themselves. Your discipline highlights their hesitation. Your boundaries expose where they overextended. Your steadiness under pressure reveals how often they let circumstances dictate their direction. And the part that unsettles them most is that you're not trying to prove anything. You're simply living it. That's what makes their focus so persistent. Because the more naturally you embody what they avoided, the harder it becomes for them to dismiss it as anything other than a truth they've been trying not to face. The reality is, when someone quietly disproves the framework we've leaned on to stay comfortable, it creates a kind of internal tension that's hard to ignore. It's not about wanting what you have. It's about realizing that the boundaries they treated as fixed were never absolute. Your existence introduces a gap between what they believed and what's clearly possible. And that gap demands an answer. Because once someone sees that the rules they relied on don't apply the way they thought, they're left with a choice: adjust their perspective or continue holding on to something that no longer holds up. Your reality doesn't argue, it demonstrates. It shows without explanation that the barriers they treated as permanent may have been choices repeated, not conditions imposed. And that's what sharpens their focus. They start dissecting everything: your decisions, your pace, the way you respond and the way you don't. Not out of admiration, but out of a need to close the distance between where they are and where you continue to move. Because the longer that gap remains, the harder it becomes to justify why they stayed still while you kept going. But observation has its limits. No amount of studying, dissecting, or second-guessing can alter the fact that you operate on your own terms, unaffected by whether they understand or approve. Your progress doesn't pause for their conclusions, and your composure doesn't depend on their agreement. That's what makes it so undeniable. Because in the end, your path isn't shaped by their perspective. It exists beyond it. And that reality quietly reinforces a truth they can't avoid. Limitations only hold power when they're accepted, and you chose not to. Number 4. Their attention sharpens around one objective: to find where you might bend. This isn't admiration, and it isn't curiosity in its pure form. It's analysis driven by expectation. They assume that, like everyone else, there must be a point where pressure shows on the surface. So they watch closely, reading into silences, measuring reactions, assigning meaning to the smallest changes. What seems ordinary to you becomes significant to them, because they're not just observing behavior, they're trying to predict a moment that confirms what they believe must eventually happen. That composure has limits, and yours is no exception. They're not focused on what you've achieved. They're focused on what they believe must eventually give way. It's not about recognizing your strength. It's about confirming their assumption that no one can maintain it indefinitely. So they watch with a kind of quiet anticipation, waiting for a crack, a moment of instability, anything that brings you back into a category they understand. In their minds, it's only a matter of time. But what unsettles them is that the moment they expect never arrives the way they imagined. And with each passing day, their certainty fades, replaced by a growing realization that your resilience isn't temporary. It's intentional. What intensifies it is that they don't fully recognize what's driving them. Beneath the surface, there's a quiet discomfort with anything they can't predict or manage. Your pace unsettles them. Your steadiness challenges them. And the idea that someone can withstand pressure without unraveling feels almost threatening to their sense of control. So without realizing it, they keep observing, revisiting moments, searching for signals that restore their expectations. A pause, a hesitation, a crack. Anything that confirms what they believe must be there. But the more they look, the more they're confronted with something they can't easily explain. A resilience that doesn't perform, doesn't announce itself, but remains consistent regardless of who's watching.